Here at BBC.com, we have an article by Stephen Brocklehurst entitled The Mystery of Anthrax Island and the Seeds of Death, also known as Grenard Island. And Stephen begins, for decades, Grenard Island off the northwest coast of Scotland was too dangerous to allow public access. It was known as Anthrax Island after it was contaminated during World War II by scientists carrying out germ warfare experiments. Anthrax is a lethal bacteria, especially when inhaled, and it proves fatal in almost all cases, even with medical treatment. These secret wartime experiments left the tiny island uninhabitable for decades, until in 1981, a group known as the Dark Harvest and its commandos launched a move to focus attention on the deadly contamination. This began with a letter to the Glasgow Herald newspaper. The Glasgow Herald newspaper, Glasgow, which said, by the time you read this, the campaign will have started in earnest. The first delivery will have been made, and where better to send the seeds of death than to the place from whence they came. That place was the Porton Down Biological Research Center in Wiltshire, the top secret Ministry of Defense laboratory. The facility was searched and nothing was found, so they searched again and found a bucket of soil near the perimeter. Why didn't they catch that the first time? The letter claimed the soil contained Bacillus anthracis, better known as anthrax, a deadly agent of germ warfare. The government scientists quickly worked it out it came from 600 miles away, on Grenard Island. Grenard had long been uninhabited when World War II led to an influx of soldiers to the Northwest Highlands to carry out secret preparations. In 1942, with the war on a knife edge, Prime Minister Winston Churchill feared the Nazis had developed a biological bomb. So he tasked his team of top scientists with finding a way of harnessing anthrax as a weapon. They had to find a testing site that was remote, uninhabited, isolated, but accessible from the mainland. Nobody across the bay and small settlements knew what they were doing, but rumors began to spread as sheep, cows, and horses began dying strange deaths. So it was blown over on the wind. Isn't that special? What about the humans? The facts about what actually happened remain a source of mystery until the declassification of a Ministry of Defense film 50 years later. It showed about 80 sheep being put in exposure crates, facing an anthrax cloud. The men conducting the experiments wore cloth overalls and hair protectors, as well as respirators and gloves. The film shows a small blast, set off by remote control, and then the white powder moving on the wind. Isn't that all very controlled? Author Cal Flynn tells in a documentary, this tiny moment, this puff of powder is releasing death. Within days, all the sheep were dead. Infected carcasses were incinerated, again releasing the anthrax, I imagine, or buried under tons of rubble when a cliff on the island was blown up. The experiment was deemed a success, and the scientists returned to Porton Down, but the anthrax remained. In order to keep the people on the mainland quiet, the government paid compensation for dead livestock. What about the dead people tending the livestock? Blaming the infections on the careless disposal of animals from a Greek ship. In another attempt to rid the island of anthrax spores, Porton Down dispatched 2 men to Grenard to set fire to the heather. And she ran screaming across the island. No, just kidding. The heather, I guess, being a field of heather, I guess. Whatever heather is. wherever she is. By the evening, locals across the bay could see a huge plume of smoke over the island. Churchill's anthrax bomb was never used. By the end of the war, Grenard had been poisoned, burned, and abandoned. It remained off-limits, and it was not until 24 years after the experiment that the warning signs even mentioned anthrax. Porton-Down experts checked the soil, but the anthrax spores were surprisingly resistant to degradation. The Dark Harvest Commandos wanted action. They blamed the continuing problem on 40 years of official indifference. 4 days after bringing the bucket of soil to Porton-Down, they struck again, this time targeting the Conservative Party conference in Blackpool. A tin box believed to contain soil from Anthrax Island was left at Blackpool Tower. Unlike the first sample, this one turned out not to contain anthrax, but the authorities were on high alert. Attempts were made to find the culprits. Police believed it must be someone in the local community. Detective Inspector Colin MacDonald was one of the officers tasked with finding who was the culprit, but he was met with a wall of silence. He tells in a documentary, "I felt there was maybe more known in the community than was being said."